Summer 1943, over the Reich. American bomber crews were dying at a rate the 8th Air Force could not sustain until one colonel proposed flying so close together that a single flak burst could destroy 3 aircraft at once. Colonel Curtis E. LeMay commanded the 305th Bomb Group at Chelmsford Airfield, 75 miles north of London. In May 1943, his B-17s were losing 1 aircraft for every 18 sorties flown. At that rate, no crew would complete a 25-mission tour. The mathematics were unforgiving. 5% losses per mission meant 72% of crews would be dead, missing, or captured before their 25th raid. The numbers were already proving it. In March 1943, the 8th Air Force had dispatched 8,214 bomber sorties over Europe. They lost 153 aircraft, a 1.86% loss rate. Acceptable, barely. By April, the Luftwaffe had adjusted. Same number of sorties, 8,089. Losses, 247 aircraft. The rate climbed to 3.05%. May was worse. The raid on Kiel on May 14th cost 8 bombers out of 126 dispatched, 6%. The Antwerp mission on May 4th lost 4 out of 79. The Saint-Nazaire raid on May 29th lost 5 out of 106. Every mission bled crews. Every mission wrote letters to families in Iowa, Texas, California, letters that began, "The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret." The Regensburg-Schweinfurt double strike in August would hit 16%. At that rate, Bomber Command would run out of crews before it ran out of Germans to bomb. General Ira Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force, knew the arithmetic. He needed 300 operational bombers to sustain strategic pressure on German industry. Each bomber required a crew of 10 men. That's 3,000 air crew on constant rotation. Training produced 200 new crews per month. At 5% losses per mission, with groups flying 2 missions per week, the replacement rate wouldn't cover the casualties. The pipeline would empty by October. Something had to change. The doctrine said, spread out. Wide formations, aircraft separated by 150 to 200 yards laterally, 500 to 1,000 feet vertically, gave each bomber room to maneuver. Room to evade, room to survive if the plane beside you exploded. The thinking came from fighter tactics, from dogfighting doctrine dating to 1918. Keep separation, maintain freedom of movement, don't cluster where one attacker can service multiple targets. For fighters, it worked. A Spitfire or Mustang could outturn, outclimb, outdive an opponent. Maneuverability was survival. Tight formations meant collision risk, reduced reaction time, death. For bombers carrying 6,000 pounds of high explosive and 2,780 gallons of 100-octane fuel, it was killing them. LeMay looked at the loss reports and saw something else. BF-109, S and FW-190S weren't hitting scattered formations equally. They were isolating stragglers, picking off bombers that drifted 300 yards out of position, aircraft with wounded pilots, damaged engines, or crews simply exhausted after 4 hours of formation flying. The Luftwaffe would vector 2 or 3 fighters onto a single straggler and kill it in under 90 seconds. The intelligence reports documented the pattern. Mission after mission, 70% of losses were aircraft that had left formation. Mechanical failure, battle damage, pilot fatigue. Once a bomber fell 500 yards behind, its survival time averaged 6 minutes. Every mission produced stragglers. Every straggler died. The defensive theory was sound. 13 Browning M2 machine guns per B-17, overlapping fields of fire, mutual support. Each gun threw 800 rounds per minute of .50 caliber ammunition. One bomber could put 10,400 rounds into the sky every 60 seconds. 18 bombers in a squadron, 186,800 rounds per minute. The theory assumed the guns could actually hit the fighters, but in practice, gunners couldn't track a fighter closing at 450 miles per hour through a 200-yard gap. The traverse rate of a flexible .50 caliber mount was 60 degrees per second maximum, good for tracking bombers, inadequate for fighters. A Bf-109 attacking from the beam at 400 yards would cross a gunner's field of fire in 1.3 seconds. By the time one bomber's waist gunner acquired the target, swung his gun through the traverse, and fired, the 109 was already inside another crew's dead zone. Too close for the first bomber's gunner to track, too far for the next bomber's gunner to engage. The effective firing window was 0.4 seconds, maybe 320 rounds, against a target moving at 660 feet per second. The fighters exploited the gaps. They flew through the spaces between bombers, firing 3-second bursts at point-blank range, then diving away before the defensive fire could converge. A well-executed attack from 7 o'clock low would hit a bomber's fuel tanks, kill the ball turret gunner, and exit the formation before 4 of the 13 defensive guns even saw the fighter. Luftwaffe training doctrine emphasized the gaps, attack through the spaces, never approach head-on into massed fire, find the isolated bomber, kill it, escape before the formation responds. It worked because the formations were too loose to provide overlapping fire. LeMay ran the geometry. Tighten the formation to 60 yards, wingtip to wingtip, 50 feet vertical separation within each squadron. Stack 3 squadrons vertically within 500 feet. The result, a box formation 600 yards wide, 500 feet tall, 200 yards deep, containing 18 aircraft. Do the math on the guns. Each B-17 carried 2.50 caliber guns in the nose, 2 in the top turret, 2 in the ball turret, 1 in each waist position, and 2 in the tail. The nose guns in top turret could fire forward. That's 6 guns per aircraft, 18 aircraft in a box, 108 guns that could fire forward simultaneously. A fighter attacking from 12 o'clock high would face not 13 guns, but 108. All firing simultaneously, all converging on a single approach corridor 200 yards wide. The combined fire would put 86,400 rounds per minute into a cone of space the attacking fighter had to fly through to reach firing range. At that volume, marksmanship became irrelevant. The fighter didn't have to be hit by aimed fire. It just had to fly through a cloud of lead, dense enough that collision was inevitable. The math extended to every attack angle. Beam attacks from 3 o'clock, 72 waist guns and ball turrets engaging, tail attacks from 6 o'clock, 36 tail guns firing into a single pursuit curve, attacks from below, 36 ball turrets, attacks from above, 72 top turrets. The formation became a flying fortress in the literal sense, a mobile defensive structure where every gun supported every other gun, where the gaps disappeared, where a fighter couldn't exploit spacing because there was no spacing to exploit. But the cost was collision risk. His staff said it was unworkable. Major Preston Piper, the 305th's operations officer, ran the numbers: 60 yards in combat, in turbulence, through clouds, with pilots already exhausted after 5 hours over enemy territory. The B-17 had a wingspan of 103 feet. 60 yards was 180 feet. That left 77 feet of clearance between wingtips, a margin that disappeared the moment a pilot sneezed, a gust hit, or someone's autopilot drifted half a degree. In training, over Kansas in clear weather, experienced pilots could hold 100-yard spacing for 30 minutes before fatigue degraded their precision. Over Germany in combat for 6 hours? Piper estimated 1 mid-air collision per 50 sorties. That's 1 collision per 3 missions. At 2 missions per week, the group would lose 2 aircraft per month to collisions, matching the fighter losses they were trying to prevent. And if one plane took a direct hit, a B-17 carried 6,000 pounds of bombs. If flak detonated that load at altitude, the explosion would produce a debris field 200 yards across. Shrapnel, engine parts, sections of wing, all traveling at terminal velocity into the bomber's flying formation beside and below the dying aircraft. 1 shell could kill 3 crews. LeMay listened to the objections, Then he pulled out the loss reports from April and May. 47 aircraft, 470 men, dead, captured, or missing. The current tactics weren't working. The loss rate was climbing. The training pipeline couldn't keep pace. His answer was simple: test it. If the tight formation produced more mid-air collisions than it prevented fighter kills, they'd go back to wide spacing. But they had to test it, because the alternative was watching Bomber Command bleed to death by September. May 17, 1943, Lorient Karaman submarine pens. The 305th launched 18 B-17s in tight formation, 6 three-plane elements compressed into 2 staggered boxes, stacked vertically with 150-foot separation. The mission was a 7-hour round trip. Climb over East Anglia, form up over the Channel, penetrate French airspace to Lorient on the Atlantic coast, bomb the concrete U-boat shelters, and return. LeMay flew in the lead aircraft. He needed to see it work or fail firsthand. The formation assembled over Molesworth at 0847 hours, cloud layer at 8,000 feet. They climbed through on instruments, breaking into clear air at 11,000 feet. The wingmen tucked in tight, 60 yards exactly as briefed. LeMay watched from the cockpit. The wingtips were visible, close, almost touchable, too close. Every instinct said spread out. They held formation. Altitude 24,000 feet at 10:15 hours, crossing the Channel, air temperature minus 40 degrees Celsius. The pilots flew with oxygen masks on, heated suits plugged in, eyes locked on the lead bomber's wingtip. No one spoke except for navigation updates and checkpoint calls. They crossed the French coast at 10:42 hours. Bf 109S from Jageschwader, 2 intercepted 40 miles inland. 12 fighters climbing from below, splitting into 2 swarms for simultaneous attacks from 10 o'clock high and 2 o'clock level. The German pilots had seen bomber formations before. They knew the doctrine. They knew the gaps. They pressed attacks to 150 yards. They broke off at 200. The wall of tracers was impassable. LeMay watched it happen. The top turret gunners acquired the fighters at 800 yards. They opened fire at 600, 18 turrets, 36 guns, every 5th round a tracer, the sky filled with red streaks converging on the approach corridor. 4 fighters tried head-on passes, the standard Luftwaffe tactic for killing bombers. Climb to 2,000 feet above the formation, roll inverted, dive through the bomber stream firing 20mm cannon and 13mm machine guns, then split S away before the tail gunners could track. The tactic worked against wide formations, against loose spacing, against bombers separated by 200 yards, not against this. 2 were hit before they reached firing range. A sustained burst from 18 top turrets, 36 guns firing 28,800 rounds per minute, filled the approach corridor with enough lead that evading it became impossible. 109 took hits in the engine cowling and glycol system. White smoke streamed from the cowling. The coolant temperature spiked. The pilot bailed out at 18,000 feet. His parachute opened. He drifted toward the French countryside below. The second fighter's canopy shattered under multiple strikes. Blood sprayed across the interior. The pilot slumped forward. The aircraft nosed down and entered a spin. It crashed 12 miles inland, creating a black smudge in a wheat field visible from 20,000 feet. None reached firing position long enough to damage a bomber. The 2 109s attempting beam attacks fared no better. The combined fire from waist gunners and ball turrets forced them to break at 300 yards, well outside effective firing range for their 20mm MG-151 cannons. One made a second pass from 6 o'clock low. The tail gunners from 6 B-17s engaged simultaneously. 12 guns. 9,600 rounds per minute converging on a single fighter. The fighter's left wing separated at the root, control surfaces gone, the aircraft tumbled. The pilot did not get out. The defensive fire was unlike anything LeMay had seen. The tracers created visible geometry, cones, spheres, walls of fire. The fighters couldn't penetrate it. They tried once, maybe twice. Then they stayed outside 300 yards and watched. The 305th continued to target. They reached the initial point at 11:23 hours. Bomb bay doors opened, altitude 24,000 feet, airspeed 155 miles per hour. The lead bombardier, Lieutenant James Chen, acquired the target in his Norden sight, the massive concrete U-boat pens at Lorient, 16 feet of reinforced concrete that could withstand any conventional bomb in the inventory. They weren't trying to penetrate the roof. They were trying to crater the entrance. Chen tracked the target for 90 seconds. Flak bursts bloomed around the formation, black puffs of 88mm shells, each explosion capable of shredding an aircraft at 100 yards. The formation held, 60-yard spacing. The pilots flew through the flak, not around it, because turning would break the formation. At 11:25 hours, Chen released. The bombardier and each of the other 17 aircraft watched his release and toggled their own loads within 3 seconds. 72 1,000-pound general-purpose bombs fell in a tight pattern. 68% landed within 500 feet of the aiming point. The entrance roadway cratered, the rail tracks buckled. The mission was a success. They turned for home at 11:27 hours. The 305th lost 0 aircraft. Flak damaged 3 bombers over the target, holes in wings and fuselage, hydraulic lines severed, 1 engine losing oil pressure. But systems held. The aircraft stayed in formation. No one fell behind. They landed at Chelmsford at 14:17 hours, 6 hours and 40 minutes after takeoff. Every aircraft accounted for. No casualties. 18 bombers, 180 men, all home. The gun camera footage told the story. 8th Air Force Headquarters at High Wycombe reviewed the mission film frame by frame. The converging fire was unlike anything doctrine predicted. When 18 top turrets fired simultaneously, the tracers formed a visible cone, a geometric shape in the sky that no fighter could penetrate. The defensive volume was absolute. Major General Frederick Anderson, commanding 8th Bomber Command, watched the footage 3 times. Then he called LeMay. "How many did you lose to collision?" "None, sir." "How long can your pilots hold that spacing?" 6 hours, sir. Tested." "Write it up. I want procedures, diagrams, radio protocols. Every group adopts this by July 1st. Within 30 days, LeMay's tactical bulletin circulated to every bomb group in England. The document was 8 pages, formation diagrams, radio procedures, assembly instructions, and the critical geometric specifications. Aircraft spacing, 60 yards lateral, 50 feet vertical within squadrons. Squadron spacing, 200 yards trail between lead high and low elements. Altitude stagger, 500 feet between squadrons. Airspeed, 155 miles per hour indicated at combat altitude. Radio discipline, minimum transmissions. Navigation updates only, no chatter. Silence preserved concentration. Assembly procedures, groups would orbit assigned radio beacons at specified altitudes until all aircraft joined formation. Lead aircraft fired flares, green for lead squadron, red for high, yellow for low. Wingmen followed the flares through cloud layers. The document emphasized one point above all others: maintain spacing. If your engines failed, if your hydraulics bled out, if your oxygen system leaked, maintain spacing until you physically couldn't, because falling out of formation meant death. Staying in formation meant 17 other crews would fight to bring you home. The pilots hated it. Flying wing position in a tight formation was the hardest job in the bomber stream. The pilot's eyes never left the lead aircraft's wingtip. His right hand stayed on the throttle, making constant micro-adjustments. Forward 2%, back 1%, forward again, every 10 to 15 seconds, hour after hour. His left hand worked the yoke and rudder trim, correcting for prop wash from the lead bomber, for weight shifts as the bombardier moved to the nose, for the 1,000 tiny perturbations that pushed a 65,000-pound aircraft out of position. The B17 had no autopilot precise enough for formation work. The C-1 autopilot could hold altitude and heading in straight flight, but it couldn't compensate for the lead bomber's speed variations. Formation flying was manual. 6 hours of constant input. It was physically exhausting. Lieutenant Robert Hansen, a wing pilot in the 91st Bomb Group, described it in his after-action report from a July 1943 mission to Hamburg. Maintained position for 5 hours, 40 minutes. Arms numb from elbow down by 3rd hour. Vision tunneled by 4th hour. Could see only the lead's wingtip, nothing else. Post-flight examination, heart rate 140, dehydration severe, muscle tremors in both hands for 6 hours after landing. Formation flying was a physical task, concentration absolute. Over enemy territory for 6 hours, it broke men, but the formation evolved. By August 1943, the combat box formalized into a 3-tier structure, lead squadron at 25,000 feet, high squadron 500 feet above and 200 yards aft, low squadron 500 feet below and 200 yards forward. 3 such boxes, 54 bombers total, formed a wing-level javelin stretching 1 mile across the sky. The geometry created overlapping fields of fire at every angle. A fighter attacking the lead box would face guns from all 3 squadrons. A fighter attacking the high squadron would be engaged by the lead and low squadron's top turrets. There was no safe approach angle. Every vector into the formation meant flying through converging fire from 40 to 60 machine guns. The Luftwaffe pilots noticed. Lieutenant Franz Steigler, a 109 pilot with Jagdgeschwader 27, wrote in his diary after a mission against 8th Air Force bombers in August 1943, "The Americans have changed their tactics. They fly so close together that attacking is nearly impossible. I made 3 approaches today. I broke off all 3 at 300 meters. The defensive fire is a wall. You cannot fly through it. You can only die in it." Other German pilots reported similar experiences. The tight formations created defensive volumes that couldn't be penetrated without accepting catastrophic losses. Single fighters stood no chance. Even swarms of 4 aircraft couldn't suppress enough guns to create an opening. The numbers shifted immediately. Before combat box adoption, 305th Bomb Group loss rate, 5.6% per mission, March to May 1943. After combat box adoption, 2.1% per mission, June to September 1943. 8th Air Force-wide figures confirmed it. Missions flown June-August 1943 with tight formations recorded 38% fewer losses to fighter attack than comparable raids in March-May. The statistical analysis was unambiguous. Combat boxes saved lives. Deep penetration missions, raids beyond fighter escort range, saw the largest improvement. The August 17th Regensburg raid lost 24 bombers out of 146 dispatched, 16.4%. Catastrophic. But intelligence estimates predicted 32 losses based on earlier loose formation tactics. The combat box saved 8 aircraft, 80 men. The Bremen raid on June 13th lost 26 bombers, 17.8%, but 19 of those losses were stragglers, aircraft that had left formation due to battle damage or mechanical failure. Only 7 bombers were shot down while in formation. The geometry worked. But the cost was elsewhere. Pilots flying wing positions fought constant control inputs, throttle adjustments every 12 seconds to hold station, eyes locked on the lead aircraft's wingtip, never scanning the horizon, never resting. Formation, flying at combat radius, 6 hours from England to Germany and back, left pilots drenched in sweat, hands cramped from gripping the yoke, decision-making degraded by cumulative fatigue. Post-mission medical examinations of wing pilots showed elevated heart rates, averaging 125 beats per minute over the 6-hour mission, compared to 90 for lead pilots. Dehydration was universal. Pilots lost an average of 8 pounds per mission, mostly water weight. Stress hormone levels matched frontline infantry under sustained fire. The flight surgeons worried about long-term effects. How many missions could a pilot fly before fatigue became permanent? Before reaction times slowed enough to cause crashes? They didn't have answers. The war didn't give them time to study it, and mid-air collisions rose, 4 incidents in June 1943 alone, 2 over the North Sea during assembly, when groups climbing through cloud layers flew into each other, 2 in target area turns, when formations banking over Wilhelmshaven and Bremen closed lateral spacing to 40 yards and wingtips touched. Each collision killed 20 men, 2 bombers, 10 crew each, gone in an instant. The aircraft would lock together, both losing lift, both entering spins, both shedding parts as they fell. Parachutes rarely deployed. The fall from 25,000 feet took 90 seconds. Few men stayed conscious past 15,000 feet without oxygen. The worst incident happened on June 22nd over Hulls. The 384th Bomb Group was banking left off the target when turbulence from preceding formations buffeted the low squadron. One B-17's autopilot malfunctioned, a C-1 unit that locked the ailerons full right. The aircraft rolled 15 degrees right in 2 seconds. The pilot fought the controls. Too late. The bomber's right wingtip sliced through the vertical stabilizer of the aircraft 60 yards to its right. Both stabilizers separated. Both aircraft lost directional control. They collided again at 22,000 feet. A full fuselage impact that killed everyone instantly. The wreckage fell as a single mass, breaking apart at 10,000 feet and scattering across 6 square miles of German farmland. 20 men, 1 autopilot failure. The assembly procedures evolved. Groups would take off at 1-minute intervals, climb to assigned altitudes over specific radio beacons, and circle until the entire wing formed up. In clear weather, it took 45 minutes. In cloud, it took 90 minutes and burned 400 gallons of fuel per aircraft before they even crossed the English coast. Bad weather aborted missions before they started. If cloud tops exceeded 20,000 feet, assembly became impossible. The bombers would circle in the murk, unable to see each other, burning fuel, occasionally colliding. On October 8, 1943, a mission to Bremen was scrubbed when 2 B-17 collided during climb-out through overcast. Both exploded. 20 men dead before the first bomb was armed. Weather became a constraint. 8th Air Force could only launch missions when English cloud cover remained below 15,000 feet. Between October 1943 and March 1944, 43% of scheduled missions were scrubbed due to weather. The strategic bombing campaign became weather-dependent, but when the weather cleared, the combat box worked. And LeMay's nightmare scenario happened, October 14, 1943. Schweinfurt. Mission 115, target, ball-bearing factories, the industrial complex that produced 52% of Germany's anti-friction bearings. Without bearings, tanks couldn't move, aircraft couldn't fly. The entire German war machine would seize. Distance, 840 miles round trip beyond fighter escort range for P-47 Thunderbolts. The bombers would fly the last 200 miles alone. The Luftwaffe knew it. They massed 300 fighters along the route. The 8th Air Force dispatched 291 bombers in 16 combat boxes. The Luftwaffe responded with everything. Bf-109s, FW-190s, Bf-110 twin-engine fighters carrying 21-centimeter rockets, even Ju-88s modified for bomber-destroyer missions with 37-millimeter cannon in the nose. The raid cost 60 bombers, 20% losses, 600 men. It was called Black Thursday, the day Bomber Command learned the limits of unescorted daylight raids. The day the combat box proved it could reduce losses but not eliminate them. In one of those boxes, flying in the 305th Bomb Group's high squadron, a B-17 named Lady Liberty took a direct flak hit at 24,000 feet. An 88-millimeter shell, detonated by a time fuse set for 24,000 feet, plus or minus 200 feet, exploded 30 feet from the aircraft. Shrapnel perforated the fuselage in 47 places. One fragment punctured the bomb bay. It hit the arming wire on a 1,000-pound general-purpose bomb. The bomb detonated. Then, the other 5 bombs detonated sympathetically. The explosion was visible from 10 miles away, an orange-black fireball 200 feet across. The aircraft disappeared, simply ceased to exist. One frame of gun camera footage from a trailing bomber showed a B-17 in formation. The next frame showed empty sky and a debris cloud. The overpressure wave from 6,000 pounds of high explosive detonating at altitude was catastrophic. It severed the tail of the aircraft 60 yards to starboard. Direct hit from a 3-pound chunk of engine block traveling at 800 feet per second. The tail section separated cleanly at the fuselage ring frame. The tail gunner, Sergeant Michael Donovan, died instantly. The bomber nosed down, entered a flat spin, and broke apart at 18,000 feet. The wings separated. The fuselage tumbled. No parachutes. Debris punctured the fuel tanks of a third bomber 50 yards below. Aviation gasoline, 2,780 gallons of 100-octane fuel, ignited. The fire spread from the wing roots to the fuselage in 4 seconds. The aircraft burned for 12 seconds before the fire reached the bomb bay. The bombardier, Lieutenant Paul Hendricks, and the navigator, Lieutenant James Morrison, bailed out. They jumped at 23,000 feet. Their parachutes opened. They survived the jump. Both were captured within an hour of landing. The rest of the crew, pilot, co-pilot, engineer, radio operator, waist gunners, ball turret gunner, tail gunner, wrote it down. The aircraft broke apart at 16,000 feet. The fuselage hit a forest 6 miles southwest of Schweinfurt. No survivors. All 3 bombers went down within 8 seconds. 18 men lost for 1 shell. But the formation held. The remaining 15 bombers of that box continued the bomb run. They entered the IP, initial point, start of the bombing run, at 24,000 feet, airspeed 155 miles per hour, bomb bay doors open. The lead bombardier, Lieutenant Robert Shaw, acquired the target in his Norden site, the Kugelfischer ball-bearing plant, a complex of 23 buildings covering 40 acres. Flak intensified. The Germans knew the route. They knew the altitude. They had pre-positioned 88mm batteries in a 3-mile radius around every strategic target. The guns fired predictive barrages, calculated firing patterns that filled specific volumes of sky with shrapnel at specific times. The formation flew through it. Shaw tracked the target through 90 seconds of flak. His hands were steady. The bomb sight computed lead angle, drift, altitude, airspeed. At 12:14 hours, the solution converged. He pressed the release. The other 14 aircraft toggled their loads on his signal. Total time spread, 2.8 seconds. Total ordnance, 56,000 pounds. 70% of the bombs fell within 1,000 feet of the aiming point. The Kugelfischer plant took direct hits on buildings 12, 15, and 18. The grinding shops where raw steel became precision bearings. Production dropped 67% for 3 months. The formation turned for home at 12:16 hours. They fought their way out. The Luftwaffe attacked for 90 minutes during the withdrawal. Fighters made repeated passes. The defensive fire never stopped. Guns overheated. Barrels warped. Gunners fired until their ammunition was exhausted, then just tracked targets and called out positions to gunners who still had rounds. They landed at Chelmsford with 7 confirmed fighter kills, 3 probables, 2 damaged. 3 B-17s were so heavily damaged they never flew combat again, written off, stripped for parts, their airframes used to repair other bombers. The group armorer counted 1,247 bullet and shrapnel holes across the 15 returning aircraft. But they came home. The Schweinfurt raid proved 2 things. The combat box reduced losses but couldn't eliminate them, and unescorted deep penetration missions were unsustainable. The 8th Air Force suspended raids beyond escort range for 2 months while they waited for longer-range fighters. The Luftwaffe adjusted tactics. Frontal attacks intensified. Bf-109s in line abreast formations of 4 to 6 aircraft, all firing into the nose of the lead box from 600 yards, breaking left and right at 100 yards before the defensive fire became lethal. The tactic worked, because the B-17F's nose was weak. Only two handheld .50 caliber guns operated by the bombardier and navigator. 2 men, 2 guns, trying to track 4 fighters closing at a combined speed of 650 miles per hour. It wasn't enough. German pilots exploited it ruthlessly. Major Egon Mayer, commanding 3JG2, developed the head-on attack doctrine, standardized procedures for frontal assaults on bomber formations. 4 fighters in line abreast, 50 yards between aircraft. Approach from 12 o'clock high. Open fire at 800 yards with 20mm cannon. Maintain fire until 100 yards. Brake hard left and right. 2 fighters each direction, diving beneath the formation. The tactic killed lead bombers. Without the lead bombardier, the entire box lost bombing accuracy. The mission effectiveness dropped even if the formation survived. Between October and December 1943, frontal attacks accounted for 38% of bomber losses, up from 12% in July-September. So the combat box gained a new element. Boeing and the modification centers at Burbank, Cheyenne, and Tulsa added firepower. First, cheek guns, single .50 caliber mounts installed in the left and right nose windows. Installation time, 8 hours per aircraft. The modification gave the bombardier and navigator better firing angles and faster target acquisition, but it wasn't enough. Then, chin turrets. Bendix Corporation designed a powered twin-gun turret that mounted beneath the bombardier station. Electric motors provided 60-degree traverse and 30-degree elevation. A computing gun sight gave lead correction for deflection shots. 2 guns, 800 rounds per gun. The bombardier controlled it with a hand grip and trigger. The first chin turrets appeared on B-17Gs, rolling off the production line in September 1943. By February 1944, every new B-17 carried the chin turret as standard equipment. The modification centers retrofitted older F models through the winter, 4 forward-firing guns instead of 2. The lead bomber in a combat box could now put 3,200 rounds per minute into a head-on attack corridor. The geometry shifted again. Frontal attacks became lethal for both sides. German pilots pressed them anyway, because the alternative was letting 54 bombers reach their target unopposed. The cycle continued. German pilots shifted to attacks from below, where the ball turret's traverse was slowest and the fuselage blocked the waist gunner's field of fire. The Sperry ball turret could traverse 360 degrees and elevate from horizontal to 90 degrees down, but its rate was slow, 30 degrees per second. A fighter attacking from directly below could approach to 100 yards before the turret could track. Bomber groups staggered low squadrons further forward to unmask more ventral guns. If the low squadron flew 300 yards ahead instead of 200 yards, its ball turrets could engage fighters approaching the lead squadron from below. The Luftwaffe responded with Schräge Musik, upward-firing cannon installations. Bf-110S and Ju-88s carried 20mm or 30mm cannon mounted at 70-degree angles in the fuselage. The fighters would approach from directly beneath, outside the ball turret's cone of fire, match speed with the bomber, and fire upward into the unarmored belly. One burst would ignite fuel tanks or detonate the bomb load. The tactic worked until bomber crews started spotting the fighters below and calling them out to neighboring aircraft. Ball turret gunners would fire straight down, outside their turret's design limits, and hit the attacking fighters from above. Each adjustment bought weeks. Then, the Luftwaffe countered again. But the fundamental geometry remained. Tight formations worked because they converted 54 individual bombers into a single defensive organism. A weapon system measured not in aircraft, but in fields of fire. In the tonnage of lead, a fighter pilot had to fly through to reach release range. In the mathematical certainty that attacking a combat box meant accepting a 15% chance of being hit during the approach run. 15% was survivable once, twice, not 20 times, not over a 6-month tour. The Luftwaffe's loss rates climbed faster than its replacement rates. By March 1944, experienced German fighter pilots, men with 20, 30, 50 kills, were dying at 8% per month. The math broke the other way. The training pipeline couldn't replace them. German flight training had been cut from 240 hours in 1942 to 160 hours in 1943 to 110 hours by early 1944. New pilots arrived at frontline squadrons with minimal gunnery training, inadequate formation experience, and no tactical education beyond basic maneuvers. They died in their first 5 missions. Hauptmann Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-77, described the situation in a February 1944 report to Luftwaffe High Command. "We are losing our experienced pilots faster than we can train replacements. The new pilots cannot survive against the American defensive fire. They do not have the skill to press attacks close enough to be effective. They break off at 300 meters and waste ammunition. The Americans reach their targets. We die trying to stop them." By March 1944, P-51 Mustangs were escorting bombers to Berlin and back. Fighter losses dropped, bomber losses dropped. The strategic air campaign became sustainable. The P-51 had the range, 1,650 miles with drop tanks, enough to escort raids anywhere in Germany. And it had the performance, 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, faster than any Luftwaffe fighter except the Me-262 jet. The Mustangs didn't just protect the bombers, they hunted the German fighters aggressively, pursuing them back to their airfields and shooting them down during landing. But the combat box stayed. Because it worked for another reason. Bombing accuracy. Tight formations allowed an entire squadron to release on one bombardier's signal. 18 aircraft, 72 tons of ordnance, all within a 3-second window. The Norden bomb sight was precise. Under test conditions, bombardiers could put bombs in a 100-foot circle from 20,000 feet. But in combat, with flak bursting, fighters attacking, the aircraft pitching in turbulence, accuracy degraded to 500 feet. Squadron releases compensated. If 18 bombers released together, their bombs would fall in a pattern 500 feet across, but saturated, 144 bombs covering every square yard of the target area. It traded precision for saturation. For strategic targets like marshalling yards, oil refineries, and industrial complexes spread across acres, saturation worked. The results proved it. Pre-combat box raids, average circular error 750 feet. That meant 50% of bombs landed within 750 feet of the aiming point, and 50% landed outside that radius, wasted on empty fields and residential areas. Post-combat box raids, average circular error 420 feet. The bombs landed 44% closer to the aiming point simply because the bombardiers could see each other's aircraft, could time their releases to within 1 second of the lead bombardier's toggle. The oil campaign illustrated it. Operation Point Blank targeted synthetic oil plants, the refineries that converted German coal into aviation fuel. Each plant covered 200 to 400 acres. Destroying them required hitting specific structures, hydrogenation units, distillation towers, catalytic crackers. On May 12, 1944, the 8th Air Force hit the Leuna synthetic oil plant near Mersburg with 935 bombers in 52 combat boxes. They dropped 1,729 tons of bombs. Post-strike reconnaissance showed 85% of the bombs landed within the plant boundary. 18 critical structures took direct hits. Production dropped 92% for 6 weeks. The same target, attacked in March 1943 with loose formations, had absorbed 450 tons of bombs with only 34% landing inside the plant boundary. The tight formations made the difference. And there was a psychological effect. Crews flying in tight formation felt safer. They could see the bombers beside them, above them, below them. They could see the other gunners firing. They could see the fighters breaking off under converging fire. The isolation disappeared. The terror of being alone over Germany, singled out, hunted. That fear diminished when you were surrounded by 17 other bombers, all flying the same heading, all committed to the same mission. It wasn't objective safety. A bomber in a tight formation was statistically safer, but not invulnerable. Flak didn't care about formation geometry. An 88mm shell would kill a bomber in a combat box just as dead as a bomber flying alone. But subjective safety mattered. Morale mattered. Technical Sergeant William Carter, a waist gunner with the 395th Bomb Group, described it in a letter home after his 8th mission. When the fighters come at us, I can see the other gunners firing. I can see the tracers from 50 guns converging on one fighter. I know we're all shooting at the same target. I know if a fighter gets through to us, it had to fly through hell to do it. That helps. It doesn't stop the fear, but it helps. A crew that believed the formation would protect them flew better, fought harder, came home more often. The statistics bore it out. Groups with high formation discipline, units that consistently maintained 60-yard spacing through entire missions, had 23% lower loss rates than groups with looser discipline. The difference wasn't the formation geometry itself. It was the crew confidence that came from flying in a tight, disciplined formation. Confidence affected decision-making. Pilots who believed they were protected would hold formation through heavier flak. Bombardiers who trusted their escorts would take extra seconds to refine their aim. Gunners who saw the formation working would fire more accurately, conserving ammunition for critical moments. The psychological feedback loop reinforced the tactical advantage. By summer 1944, the combat box had evolved into its final form. Wings flew in 3-box formations, 162 bombers total, stacked vertically across 2,000 feet of altitude. The formations were so large they created their own weather. Wingtip vortices from 162 aircraft generated turbulence visible on radar 20 miles away. Assembly took 2 hours. Groups would take off from 40 different airfields across East Anglia, climb to assigned altitudes, and orbit radio beacons until the entire wing formed. The lead navigator would fire colored flares. The wing would turn onto the departure heading. By the time they crossed the English coast, 162 bombers would be flying in precision formation, 60 yards between aircraft, ready for the 6-hour mission into Germany. It was the largest aerial formation ever flown in combat. 8th Air Force flew 10,631 bomber sorties between June 1943 and May 1944 using combat box formations. Loss rate to fighter attack 2.9%. Loss rate in earlier loose formations 4.7%. That difference is 191 aircraft. Each B-17 carried a crew of 10 men. 191 aircraft equals 1,910 men. Pilots, navigators, bombardiers, engineers, radio operators, gunners. Men from Iowa and Texas and California. Men with families waiting in Kansas City, Detroit, Atlanta. 1,910 men who came home because Curtis LeMay ran the geometry. The war moved on. By June 1944, the Normandy invasion drew Luftwaffe fighters away from bomber defense. By September, Germany was burning its fighters on the ground to save fuel. By December, German fighter opposition had collapsed. The combat box became obsolete not because it failed, but because it succeeded long enough for air superiority to be won elsewhere. Curtis LeMay never called it innovation. He called it arithmetic. The simplest possible calculation: more guns firing simultaneously equals fewer bombers lost. Everything else was geometry and discipline. He was promoted to brigadier general in September 1943. By January 1944, he commanded the 3rd Bomb Division, 40% of the 8th Air Force's bomber strength. By August 1944, he was in the Pacific, commanding 21st Bomber Command in the B-29 campaign against Japan. He brought the combat box with him. B-29s over Tokyo flew in tight formations, 60 yards between aircraft, just like the B-17 over Germany. The geometry worked the same at 30,000 feet over the Pacific as it had at 25,000 feet over Europe. The formation that made American daylight bombing survivable until the fighters arrived to make it irrelevant. But for 18 months, from May 1943 to November 1944, the combat box was the difference between mission success and strategic failure, between winning the air war and losing bomber crews faster than training could replace them. The numbers tell the story. In May 1943, Bomber Command was losing 5.6% per mission. At that rate, the strategic bombing campaign would have collapsed by October. The crews would have died, the replacement pipeline would have emptied, the daylight raids would have stopped. By September 1943, with combat boxes standard across the 8th Air Force, the loss rate had dropped to 2.1%. Sustainable? Barely, but sustainable. By March 1944, with P-51 escorts and combat boxes working together, the loss rate dropped to 1.3%. The strategic bombing campaign became inevitable. Germany couldn't stop it. The Luftwaffe couldn't kill enough bombers to matter. The math shifted. The war shifted. 60 yards of air, 600 yards of firepower. The formation doctrine said, spread out, give each bomber room to maneuver, room to survive. 30 years of aerial combat theory said wide formations were safer. LeMay's geometry said, tighten up. Eliminate the gaps. Make the fighters fly through converging fire from 54 aircraft, not 13. The losses dropped. The missions continued. The war moved closer to its end. One pilot, one calculation, one test mission over France. One afternoon in May 1943, when 18 B17s flew tighter than doctrine allowed, and 0 came home damaged by fighters. The skeptics watched the gun camera footage. They saw the tracers converging. They saw the fighters breaking off. They saw the geometry working. They wrote the new doctrine. Every group in England adopted it within 60 days, and 1,910 men who would have died in loose formations came home instead. They landed at Chelmsford, at Molesworth, at Kimbolton, at Thorpe Abbotts. They climbed out of their bombers. They walked across English grass to debriefing rooms where intelligence officers asked them what they saw, what worked, what didn't. They answered. They flew again the next week. They completed their tours. They went home to Iowa and Texas and California. They lived because someone ran the math. Curtis LeMay died in 1990, age 83. He never wrote about the combat box in his memoirs, never claimed credit for it. When asked about it in a 1986 interview, he said, "It was obvious. The fighters were exploiting the gaps, close the gaps, simple. 60 yards between wingtips, 18 aircraft in a box, 54 aircraft in a wing, mathematics applied to murder, geometry applied to survival, the formation that saved 1,910 men. The formation that won the air war over Europe, the combat box.